Morning it all fell apart, started the same way every Tuesday did. My husband kissing me on the cheek, smelling like the cedar soap he'd used since before I knew him, telling me he'd meet me at Harlow's in an hour. Harlow's is one of those places on the Upper West Side where the tables are too small and the coffee costs too much, and everyone pretends not to notice anyone else while noticing absolutely everyone. My husband loved it, said it made him feel like he was in a Woody Allen film. I used to find that charming. I got there first, took the corner table near the window, the one with the view of the street. I ordered a sparkling water and watched the cabs go by and thought about nothing in particular. That's the version of myself I miss most, the one who could sit in a cafe and just breathe. He arrived 10 minutes later with his business partner beside him. The two of them came through the door already mid-laugh, already comfortable in a way that felt rehearsed. My husband slid into the seat across from me, my brother-in-law dropped into the chair to my left, and before I could even say hello, my husband looked at his phone and said he had to step away to take a call. That was the moment, that exact moment when both of them stood up together to go handle something at the bar, or the bathroom, or outside. I don't even remember what they said. I was already looking at the door. Because someone else was walking through it? He was older, maybe 60, maybe older than that. Gray at the temples, a dark jacket that had been expensive once. He moved through the room like a man who had spent a long time trying not to be noticed, and he was very good at it. He came directly to my table, didn't hesitate, didn't look around. He set a small envelope on the tablecloth in front of me, plain white. My name, just my first name, Neve, written in blue pen on the front. He said, very quietly, "Don't open this here. Wait until you're alone tonight. You're going to need what's inside." I said, "Who are you?" He was already stepping back, someone who should have done this a long time ago. And then he was gone, through the door, into the street, swallowed by the city like he'd never been there at all. I slid the envelope into my bag. My hands were steady. I don't know how. When my husband came back to the table, I was smiling. I talked about the renovation on our kitchen, about whether we should go to his mother's for Thanksgiving, about the article I'd read on the train that morning. I ate half a croissant. I laughed at something my brother-in-law said. Inside, I was completely still in the way you go, still right before something breaks. I didn't open it until after midnight. My husband had fallen asleep early. He'd been doing that a lot lately, early to bed, phone face down on the nightstand, and I sat on the floor of our closet with the light on and I opened the envelope. There were 3 things inside: a USB drive, a key, small, silver, the kind that opens a lockbox or a safety deposit drawer, and a folded piece of paper with an address on it and 4 words underneath: 3rd floor, room 312. I sat there for a long time. Then I plugged the USB into my laptop. The files took a moment to load. There were dozens of them: PDFs, spreadsheets, scanned documents, photographs. I opened the first one and it took me maybe 20 seconds to understand what I was looking at. Wire transfers, hundreds of them, going back almost 4 years. The company name at the top of the transaction records was one I recognized: DeVox Capital Partners. My husband's firm, the one we'd celebrated when he made partner, the one that paid for our apartment and our vacations and the kitchen renovation we'd been talking about at lunch that afternoon. The transfers were going to accounts I didn't recognize, shell companies with addresses in the Cayman Islands, in Luxembourg, and Singapore, and the amounts. I kept having to recount the zeros, not thousands, millions, moved in quiet increments, structured to stay under the reporting threshold, routed and rerouted through a network that had clearly been built by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. My husband had a business degree from Wharton. He knew exactly what he was doing. I kept scrolling. The photographs were worse, not violent, nothing like that, just images of meetings, of handshakes, of men in restaurants I recognized and offices I'd visited, men I'd had dinner with, men who had kissed me on the cheek and asked how I liked my steak. I found a photograph of my brother-in-law and felt my stomach drop straight through the floor. There was a final document at the bottom of the folder, a memo, internal, dated 8 months ago. It laid out a plan, in the kind of careful bureaucratic language that makes terrible things sound administrative. to liquidate a set of legacy accounts and distribute the funds before what it called the exposure window. The exposure window opened in 6 weeks. I looked at the clock. It was 2047 in the morning. I closed the laptop, sat in the dark of the closet for a while, and tried to remember the last time something in my life had felt solid. His name was Franklin Vare. I found that out 3 days later when I went to the address on the paper. Room 312 in a building on 54th Street that looked like it used to be offices, now converted to short-term rentals, the kind of place people use when they don't want a paper trail. He opened the door before I knocked. He'd been expecting me. There was coffee already made, and he poured me a cup without asking, and we sat at a small table by the window, and he told me everything. He'd worked at DeVos for 11 years, started in compliance, moved into risk management, spent the last 3 years watching what he called the architecture being built around him. He said he told himself at first that he was misreading things. Then he told himself it wasn't his problem. Then a colleague of his, a man named Rupert, who had 2 kids in a house in Connecticut and who had also started asking questions, was killed in a car accident on the Merritt Parkway in February. They said ice on the road, Franklin said. It hadn't rained in 2 weeks. After that, he stopped telling himself anything. He just started copying files. He'd tried to go to the SEC 8 months ago. He'd been turned away. He didn't have documentation in the right format. He didn't have a lawyer. And the person he spoke to had looked at him with the particular blankness of someone who has already been told not to take certain meetings. He'd tried again through a different channel, through a former colleague who had contacts at the FBI. That was still moving, slowly, through whatever bureaucratic maze it moved through. But the exposure window? 6 weeks, I said. 5 now. He looked at me steadily. They're going to move the money and disappear the trail. If someone doesn't accelerate the timeline, there won't be anything left to find. I asked, why me? He was quiet for a moment. Because you're the only person close enough to get to the physical documentation. There's a secondary archive, hard copies, backups, things that can't be digitally altered or deleted. Your husband keeps it somewhere you can access. The key tells you where. I looked at the key I'd been carrying in my jacket pocket for 3 days. I hadn't been able to put it in my wallet. Couldn't stand the thought of it being near my credit cards, near anything ordinary. How do you know I won't just warn him? I asked. Franklin Vare looked at me for a long moment. Because you've been sleeping next to a stranger for 4 years, he said, and some part of you has known it. I drove home in silence. I didn't turn on the radio. I thought about the way my husband looked at his phone when I walked into a room, the way certain conversations stopped when I came downstairs, the way he had always managed the finances so completely, so smoothly that I had never once needed to think about them. I had let myself be managed. I was done being managed. The key fit the lock of a storage unit in Red Hook. We'd rented it 3 years ago, or he had technically, and put both our names on the lease because that was what you did. You put your wife's name on things. It made sense for joint property purposes, for continuity. I had never been there. I hadn't thought about it in years. Inside were boxes. File boxes labeled in his handwriting quarterly, by year, going back to the beginning of the firm, and at the back, a fireproof cabinet, 4 drawers, locked. The key opened it. I spent 4 hours in that storage unit. I photographed everything on my phone, account records, correspondence, a ledger that had been printed and bound like a report, which documented every transaction in the spreadsheets I'd already seen, but here with the real names attached. Not shell companies. People whose names I recognized from the firm's client list, from charity galas, from the Christmas cards we sent every December. And then I found a folder labeled ROC. Rupert Osei, the man Franklin had told me about, the man who died on the Merritt Parkway. Inside the folder was a printed email chain. My husband's name in the CC line. The dates were from the week before Rupert died. I read the emails 3 times. I sat on the cold concrete floor of that storage unit and I read them 3 times, and the second time I started shaking and the third time I stopped. I photographed the folder. I photographed every page. Then I locked the cabinet, turned off the light, and drove to the FBI field office in Lower Manhattan. They didn't turn me away. I had documentation in the right format. I had a USB drive, 347 photographs, a key to a storage unit with a 4-drawer fireproof cabinet, and Franklin Vere's contact information. The agent I spoke to, a woman named Salcedo, which is not a name I will ever forget, sat across from me in a conference room for 2 hours and did not look at me with blankness. She looked at me the way people look when they are about to do something significant. "You understand," she said, near the end, "that you need to go home and act exactly as you have been." "How long?" 2 weeks, maybe less. 2 weeks, I drove home. I made dinner. I told my husband I'd been shopping, showed him a bag from a store on Madison Avenue that I'd stopped into specifically to have something to show. He kissed me on the cheek and asked what was in the bag, and I told him it was a scarf for his mother's birthday. He said, "She'll love it." I said, "I hope so." I don't think I slept more than 3 hours a night for the next 12 days. They came on a Wednesday morning. My husband was in the kitchen when I heard the knock. 3 sharp raps, then the bell. He went to answer it. I stood at the top of the stairs and watched him open the door and watched his face go through 4 different expressions in about 2 seconds. Surprise, confusion, a flash of something that I think was calculation, and then finally a kind of settling, like a man who has been waiting for a door to open and has run out of ways to pretend it won't. My brother-in-law was arrested at his office at the same time. I found that out later. 6 other men were taken in across the city that morning. The operation had been coordinated for weeks. I sat on the stairs while it happened. I didn't go down. I didn't say anything. At one point, my husband looked up and saw me there, and we held eye contact for a long moment, and I think he understood, in that moment, everything. I didn't look away first. The trial took 11 months. I sat in that courtroom for most of it. Not every day. My attorney told me I didn't have to, that my testimony had already been given, that I could begin my life. But I went anyway, more days than not. The prosecution established with the kind of methodical clarity that good lawyers bring to devastating things that DeVos Capital Partners had been operating a securities fraud scheme for 6 years. The total moved through the accounts was just over $340 million. The scheme had touched 43 clients, most of whom had no knowledge of it and had trusted the firm with their retirement savings, their children's college funds, their inheritances. Franklin Vere testified for 3 days. He was calm on the stand in the way people are calm when they have already survived the worst part. His voice didn't shake once. The emails about Rupert Osei were introduced as evidence on the 9th day of testimony. I watched my husband's attorney object, watched the judge overrule it, watched the jury see on their screens what I had seen on a concrete floor in Red Hook, and I felt something leave my body. Not anger, not grief exactly, something that had been sitting on my chest for a very long time. My husband received 22 years, his partner and my brother-in-law received slightly less. 3 other men pleaded guilty before the trial ended. Rupert Osei's widow, a woman named Celestine, was present for the sentencing. I found her afterward in the hallway outside the courtroom. I didn't know what to say to her. I told her I was sorry for what had been done to her family. She looked at me for a moment and then she said, "You're the one who found the folder?" "Yes." She nodded. She didn't say anything else. She didn't need to. We stood there together in the hallway for a little while, 2 women in a building full of other people's decisions, and something passed between us that I don't have the right words for. The civil settlement included compensation for the defrauded clients. Some of it went to Celestine and her children. I made sure my attorney knew that was important to me before I signed anything. DeVos Capital Partners was dissolved by court order in February. The apartment, which had been purchased partly with funds the government now considered proceeds of fraud, was sold as part of the asset forfeiture proceedings. I moved into a 2-bedroom in Brooklyn. 3rd floor, no elevator, a view of someone else's fire escape and a strip of sky above it. I bought second-hand furniture and put a plant on the windowsill and made coffee in a small machine that cost $30 and makes mediocre coffee, and I love it in a way I never loved anything that was expensive. Franklin Vere sends me a message every few weeks, just to check in. We have had dinner twice. He is a careful, quiet man who spent years watching something terrible happen and finally decided he had to do something about it. I understand that more now than I did when I was sitting in Harlow's trying to keep my hands steady. The envelope is still in a drawer in my desk. I kept it. I kept the piece of paper with the address on it too. I look at them sometimes, not often, but sometimes, and I think about the version of myself who sat in that cafe and had no idea what was already in her bag. I think about how quickly everything can change, how a Tuesday morning can be the last ordinary thing. And I think about what Franklin said to me in that room on 54th Street. Some part of you has known it. He was right. I had known. Not consciously, not in any way I could have named or explained to anyone, but somewhere underneath the croissant and the coffee and the conversation about Thanksgiving, some part of me had known. I just needed someone to put it in my hands. I still think about that Tuesday morning sometimes. The coffee going cold, the croissant I ate half of, the way I smiled and talked about Thanksgiving while an envelope full of evidence sat in my bag 30 inches from my husband's hand. People ask me, not often, but occasionally, whether I felt guilty. Whether turning over that USB drive, testifying, sitting in that courtroom for 11 months felt like a betrayal of something. And I understand why they ask. Marriage is supposed to mean something. Loyalty is supposed to mean something. But what I've come to believe, slowly, over the time it took me to furnish a Brooklyn apartment and learn to make decent coffee in a $30 machine, is that what I did was actually the most honest thing I'd ever done in that relationship. Honesty isn't just what you say, it's what you refuse to look away from. Franklin Vare spent years working at that firm, watching the architecture being built around him. He told himself he was misreading it. Then he told himself it wasn't his problem. Those are the two lies that let most wrong things keep happening. I must be mistaken and it's not my place. He stopped telling himself both of those things the week after Rupert died, and that decision, that quiet, unglamorous, terrifying decision, is the reason 43 families eventually got some of their money back. The reason Celestine's children have something. Franklin didn't have a law firm behind him or a safety net or any guarantee that what he was doing wouldn't destroy him. He just had clarity about what was right and the willingness to act on it even when it cost him. That's not a small thing. I don't think we talk enough about how much it costs to simply be honest when the stakes are real. What I learned about myself through all of this is that I had been confusing comfort with safety. I had a beautiful apartment and a husband who kissed me on the cheek every morning, and I had told myself that meant I was secure. But security built on something false isn't security. It's just a longer fall. The real kind of safety I've found comes from knowing what you actually know, trusting what you actually see, and having the integrity to act on it even when acting on it is the hardest thing you've ever done. My mother used to say that smart women ask questions. What she didn't say. What I had to learn myself, on a concrete floor in Red Hook at 2 p.m, photographing pages of evidence with shaking hands, is that asking the question is only the beginning. You also have to be willing to hear the answer, and then you have to be willing to do something with it. I think about Rupert Osei sometimes, a man I never met who asked questions and died for it before anyone could help him. I think about Celestine standing in that courthouse hallway and the thing that passed between us that I still don't have the right words for. I think about Franklin, careful and quiet, copying files for months in a building full of people who would have destroyed him if they'd known. None of us were heroes. We were just people who decided that the truth mattered more than our own comfort. That's all it ever takes, I think. Not courage in some grand cinematic sense. Just the willingness to keep your eyes open and not flinch from what you see. The envelope is still in my desk drawer. I'll probably keep it there.